I'd like to begin our look at the history of philosophy, especially as it's relevant for understanding Christian theology. What I'm really interested in doing is talking about the history of philosophy as a way of enriching our understanding of the history of theology, because the history of theology very much is a history of engagement with the ideas that are prevalent in the world. The Christian faith is very much interested in showing that Christ is the ultimate solution to the great problems and dilemmas of human thought. Christ is the answer, the Christian faith is the answer to many of the questions that are posed through human reason. As I mentioned, I think in our first presentation on the subject of philosophy, philosophy is a quest for truth, but what we discover in the quest for truth is that it's a never-ending quest for truth, and also that there are questions that linger on, that remain unanswered through the use of reason. That suggests that reason, as powerful as it is, and it is very powerful, reason is a powerful tool for us as human beings. It allows us to do great things with the world around us. There are great inventions, like the iPad that I'm looking at right now, as well as countless other things that we could think of, that through the methods of science that are possible because of the power of intellect and reason that we possess. All of these wonderful things that we're able to achieve grow out of our use of philosophy to try to understand what human beings can know, and then that develops into scientific theories. One of the things that we should point out, I guess, about early Greek philosophy is that the Greek philosophers were very much interested in trying to understand the nature of the material world around us. That effort to try to understand the nature of the material world around us was coupled with, or linked to, efforts to try to understand the great questions of life. What is good? What is the supreme source of all reality? Not just how does the material world work, but why does it work that way? What are the ultimate reasons for there being a physical reality? And so their scientific questions were really enshrouded in or enveloped within a larger framework of what we might call metaphysical study. Metaphysics in this context, of course, being the study of ultimate principles or first principles of reality. Have to be very careful not to confuse what I mean here in this context by metaphysics with what you might find in a bookstore under the category of metaphysical writings. Metaphysical now has come to be associated with something very, very distant from what ancient philosophy and even medieval and modern philosophy mean when we talk about metaphysics. Metaphysics is, as the name suggests, metaphysics suggests that which is beyond physics. Physics is a study of the world of matter and motion. Metaphysics is a study of principles that are even beyond the physical world. Are there principles of reality that apply to all conceivable reality and not only to the material world? What are the causes of the material world? What are the causes of the motion of the material world? Can they be fully explained in materialist terms, or just in terms of matter and motion? People like Aristotle and Plato and various other philosophers, Augustine, Aquinas, and many people down through the centuries, both Christian and non-Christian, have come to the conclusion that the material world is not sufficient to account for everything about the world. And we'll see more as we journey along how that's so. But in any case, the ancient Greek philosophy is really where our story begins. I suppose maybe that's a slight overstatement. As long as there have been human beings, there has been philosophical reflection. Human beings have wondered about what happens to the dead, or how should I live my life, or what is God like? Does God exist? These are all questions that in some way or another continually reoccur in the human mind. But for some reason, among the ancient Greeks, somewhere around 6, 7 centuries before Christ, the Greeks started asking questions that were more removed from the mythical shroudings in which human beings typically carried on these types of reflections. Let me try to be clearer about that. It seems as if all cultures everywhere produce some kind of artistic expressions or poetic expressions or mythic expressions of what they value or how they understand the world. Philosophy seeks to strip away the mythical, the artistic, and the poetic, and try to get to the kernel underneath those mediums, those artistic mediums. The artistic mediums are extremely valuable. We continue to use them today. We produce movies, we produce novels, we produce all kinds of ways of trying to get people into a philosophical idea. And we could use tons of different examples of that. In fact, probably more often than not, you could identify in a movie or a novel or a short story or whatever, you could probably identify some type of moral or some type of truth or some type of insight or vision of reality that's being communicated in that writing or in that visual depiction or artistic depiction of something. But for some reason, the ancient Greeks decided to strip away those artistic mediums or the use of those artistic mediums and try to just philosophize or think about what reality is and how to understand reality all on its own without the help of art. That may be a bit of an overstatement, but that's the gist of it, is that the ancient Greeks pushed us in that direction. Now, why did the ancient Greeks do this and not other sources of Western influence? There are lots of speculation on that. One of them may be the relative convenience and relaxation that the Greeks experienced. They had relatively warm weather. They didn't have as harsh as circumstances that maybe intense heat or intense cold might bring. But whatever the reason, they had the leisure and the time to reflect and think and develop patterns of thought and ways of understanding the world that had not occurred to people prior to the developments among the Greeks. They're going to do tremendous things, as you probably know, in the development of mathematics, in the development of scientific knowledge, and certainly philosophical knowledge. So for whatever reason, 600-700 years before the time of Jesus, you see this emergence of philosophy among the ancient Greeks. What I'd like to do is share with you a little bit about a few of these philosophers from early Greece. And I'll break this up into, hopefully, manageable units of reflection. The first one that I like to talk about is the person that's usually given the honor of being the first of the ancient Greek philosophers, and it's a man by the name of Thales. Thales lived in the 6th century BC, and Thales is famous for a series of fragments that we have of his writings. We know some about him through some other ancient writers, Aristotle being a very important one. In his book on the metaphysics, he gives an account of the history of reflection on metaphysical questions and questions regarding science and the understanding of the world. Thales taught that all is water. That's one of the short sentences that's attributed to Thales. All is water. Now, why would that short statement be of interest to us as we seek to understand philosophy? I think it's an enormously significant statement. All is water. First of all, we obviously think that that's wrong. Water itself can be subdivided into more basic elements, and then we could talk about what's even more basic than hydrogen and oxygen. But Thales, we have to give him a break here, obviously didn't have the resources that we have. He didn't have the microscopes, and he didn't have the benefit of the modern history of science to help him out. So we should be a little bit sympathetic to Thales, and actually when we stop and think about it, there's a kind of genius behind the statement, all is water. Thales would look around at the world and he could see that without water, you tend to see things shriveling up and dying. When it rains significantly, you see lots of life, you see lots of things running around. When there's not water, you find things looking for water. And when there's no water, it seems as if you don't have anything. You don't have life. You just have barrenness. And so Thales drew the conclusion that because life seems to be so dependent on water, it must be that water is really the ultimate stuff of which all reality is made. And that the water falls from the sky and it undergoes a transformation when it hits the ground. In some way or another, it goes through a kind of transformation where it takes various different forms. Think of maybe Play-Doh. You know, you take a container of Play-Doh and you're able to move it and twist it around in various different ways and create things that look very different, but really the substance of the Play-Doh stays the same. So it is here with the water. Water changes into various different forms. Sometimes we don't even recognize the water anymore, but really it's still water. Water is the stuff, the building block of all reality. What's interesting about Thales in this regard that I would point out to you is that the driving assumption here beneath Thales' theory is that there must be some stuff underneath change that is allowing change to happen. In other words, what you have in the world is not a bunch of things that are all just radically segmented off from each other. What you have is a substrate. You have a stuff, like the Play-Doh, for example, that is undergoing various different changes. But the stuff is the same underneath the changes. It takes different form, but the various different forms are only masking a common denominator or a common substance underneath all of that change. So what Thales' theory about reality is at root is it's an attempt to explain change. We all observe change constantly. We see the water falling from the sky and the grass grows. And the cow eats the grass and produces milk. And we drink the milk and our bones get big and strong. So here we see several changes that take place. The water becomes the grass becomes the cow's milk, and the cow's milk becomes human bones. We see the various changes taking place in the world, but the question is, how does that change take place? How does one thing become another thing? And so what Thales is arguing is that really there is only one thing. That's water. And that water is undergoing these different transformations so that we see different forms, but the matter that is changing is the same. So the only distinction to be made is between matter and form. Matter, the stuff that is changing; form, the different expressions or embodiments or attributes that basic substance or stuff can take on. Now, again, this is very important because it highlights a perennial issue in philosophy. This perennial issue, it's always coming up, is the issue of change. How are things changing? Why are things changing? What accounts for change? I would ask you the question, what do you think the contemporary or the present state of things is in respect to the issue of change? Do you think, just ask yourself this question, that contemporary scientific theories or cosmological theories about the universe, our current cosmological theories about the origin and nature of the universe, are they monistic? That is, do they think, does contemporary thought think that all of reality can be reduced to one stuff or one kind of thing, like Thales thought it was water? Is contemporary science monistic, or is it pluralistic? Pluralistic would be that there's a multiplicity of things that reality is made up of, that you can't reduce it all to one stuff or to one kind of reality, like water, for instance. In my view, I don't know what your perspective is, but as far as my reading and my understanding of things is concerned, it appears that contemporary thought is very much monistic, that all reality can be reduced to one stuff or to one substance or one kind of thing. And that one stuff that reality is made of is, we would say today, energy. And so energy takes on various different forms. The Big Bang, presumably 15 billion years ago or whatever, there's a Big Bang, an explosion of energy. And then over the course of billions of years, that energy begins to harden in various ways, and that becomes the basic building blocks of the universe that form in various different ways. That energy takes on various concrete forms, and that begins to clump together in various ways, and then you have the rest of the history of the universe. But the stuff undergirding or underlying the universe is the same stuff. It's energy. Now, Thales, of course, took that position. He thought it was water, but saying today that it's energy is really just a way of pushing the question much more and more deeply to try to find what it is, what that substance is of which everything is made. Now, not everybody took that position, though. Some people thought that saying that everything is reducible to one substance is too simplistic, that actually there's a multiplicity of things of which reality is made. The most extreme version of pluralism was what was called atomism. Atomism. Coming from the Greek word that sounds very much like our word atom. The word atom, it really suggests indivisibility. It can't be cut or broken into multiple pieces. So the atomists are people who held, thinkers who held, that reality is really made up of an infinite number of little pieces that can't be destroyed. They're not created, they're not destroyed, they can't be broken in any way, and those atoms are bouncing about in the great big receptacle that we call the universe, and they're coming together in various random combinations, and that's what reality is. The reality is, the truth of the matter is, according to the atomists, that nothing really changes except relative change of proximity or physical proximity. The atoms themselves stay the same. They just configure or combine together in various different ways, and we see from a distance the illusion that there's such a thing as change, when in fact there really is only change of position, not change of substance. Things stay the same for all eternity. Those are two extreme positions. The monistic one, all of reality can be reduced to one substance or stuff. The other extreme is that reality cannot be reduced to any one thing. In fact, everything is different from everything else, and that is the atoms of which everything is made. Enough of that for now. In our next presentation, we'll look at the next step, or the next contributors to the history of philosophy.